So to make people present and conscious to the systems that have destroyed generations, I think that's probably the most profound conversations that I've had in policy. Hi, my name is Fiona Gilbertson. I'm founder of Recovering Justice, which is a policy activist organisation who look at the harms created by drug policy. And so the 10% of people who will use drugs problematically are often co-opted, their voices are co-opted into creating really bad policy. And we wanted to kind of reframe that. I'd been involved in sex work advocacy and work around HIV. And I'd never really thought about drug policy, and I watched The House I Live In, and it honestly, I couldn't get it out of my mind. And I thought, I have to do something about it, because it was my community. I was watching my community. Even though it was America, it was like, oh my God, this is what this was. Yeah. And a lot of the House I Live In, it's about institutionalized racism, which is what that policy was around. I mean, Nixon's war on drugs was, around disrupting communities. In my community, I saw it as a war on poor people. You know, rich people go to rehab, poor people go to prison. Well, I think we need human rights-based policy reform in so many areas. Yes, there may be some trauma caused when your parents are taking drugs, but there's a definite trauma caused when people in uniforms charge into your house. The system is creating the perfect environment for people to need something to kill that pain. And what I'm trying to do now with Recovering Justice is really create a platform and a space for women. And we've set up a women's project. And I think sometimes the process has to be slower, and maybe we have to have conversations that are based in transformative justice. And also make sure that when we look in a room, it's like, who's here and who's not here? I'm having conversations at the moment with drug policy and sex worker communities, because often the voices of sex workers are left out of a lot of the drug policy reform work. I think the biggest barrier will be a rush to respectability, which will then make us create new systems that are replicating the old systems and are very risk averse. People who use drugs are not bad anymore, but they're sad or they're mad. So we've got this whole thing about anybody who, like, we're pathologized to death. So if you hear somebody talk about drug users, problematic drug users, you will listen to stories of childhood trauma, fractured families. So we have to have that narrative to be accepted. That's what gets us in the room. It's almost like a trauma porn. I would love to be able to move to a space where we challenge that. Do you know, we don't do it. When we're talking to the police, we don't say, what happened to you? Like, what happened to you that made it okay for you to be breaking people's doors down or kicking people to bits on, you know, I mean, whatever. And I don't know that you would want to keep pathologizing any group. Do you know, it's like, it didn't do our group any good, you know, so I wouldn't impose it on politicians but why do we do it with certain groups and not others? And you have to be able to take time and sit with people. Because if you can say, I'm a gangster and I'm a bad boy, it sounds like you have agency. It's this idea of stories. So the women that we're working now will say, I was a bad mother. That's why my children got taken away. And I am now a good mother because I don't take drugs. And when that story changes to, I went to the doctor for help at 19 with my first child and was told there was absolutely no help, but I was now going to be surveyed by the social services, and that child was removed. And then that's when my drug use became really problematic, because the pain of having children removed is the worst trauma you can enact on any human being. That story's, much more complex and much more challenging for the individual. And that's deep work. And as an organisation, we've realised that, and that's why we're kind of saying we can't just grab a story or send this woman to talk to the Daily Record. We need to create a community. Like, you couldn't get a detox here. You would wait. But we've got one of the highest records of children being removed from mothers. If you live in an affluent area, that will not happen. You will get help. We've lived it. Well, we can't think outside the system. It's really difficult. We're all so trapped in that system. Yeah, we want an end to. Everybody wants an end to state violence, an end to drug user violence, and criminalisation and imprisonment, but ultimately, I think we need to defund the police. I would like to see in 5 years' time, with the work that we're doing in County Durham and this women's projects, that there's a culture change. That these women move into positions where they are holding the system accountable. Drug policy reform will not just be creating new policies. There will have to be some sort of restorative justice practice at the back of that for the communities that have been suffering. So some drugs will have to be regulated, others will have to be returned to the communities that were already selling. It's insidious, and the more I look at it, it's like everywhere. It's just every community that is seen as outsider is impacted in some way, or disproportionately impacted. In those meetings, there was like people from every walk of life, but the ones who'd come from privileged middle class, upper class backgrounds did not have stories of the police. I mean, they were terrible stories, but they didn't include the police. Drunk driving, where there was no social work involvement, even if the kids were in the car. But the backgrounds of poor people will almost always include police and social workers and child removal and imprisonment and violence and intimidation. Yeah. Like, there's certain postcodes where the police presence is huge, and others where they'll come when you phone because the cat's stuck up a tree. And anti-systems of oppression rather than the people who are engaging in those systems. But we can say this system is so flawed and so it's not fit for purpose. So we need to create something else.